This will be for the con exercise, amplitude of sinusoidal functions from graph. So I covered this in the midline video, but just briefly, the midline is the horizontal line that passes exactly in the middle between the graph's max and minimum points. The amplitude is the vertical distance between the midline and one of the extremum points. The extremum points, again, are the maximum and minimum points. So just looking at our graph, the part in blue is our function or sine wave. Okay, the midline is right in the middle of that function. And as you can see, the amplitude is basically half the distance between the maximum, which would be this point, and the minimum, which would be this point. So if you travel from the maximum to the midline, that distance would be the amplitude. Same thing if you went from the minimum to the midline. Again, that distance would just be the amplitude. All right, so we have our trig function below. It intersects the midline. Okay, we have our trig function below, intersects the midline at this point, and the minimum point is this point right here. Okay, and they wrote the coordinates right on the graph, so it's pretty easy. Okay, the amplitude is just the distance from the midline to either the minimum or the maximum. Okay, so we're looking at y coordinates here. So this one is 1.2, that's the midline. And the minimum is this point right here. That's negative 3.4. Okay, and the way to find the amplitude, or this distance right here, we are just going to subtract the two y coordinates. So we have 1.2 minus negative 3.4. All right, and if you need to, we don't in this case, but if you need to, you take the absolute value. Okay, let me fix this. Okay, the two negatives in a row, of course, that makes it positive. 0.2 plus 0.4 is 0.6, and 1 plus 3 is 4. So that's it. This distance is just 4.6. Remember, distance is always positive, okay? So that's why we take the absolute value, although in this case it wasn't necessary. So 4.6 units. Okay, we have our function below. They gave us the minimum point coordinate and the maximum point coordinate. Okay, and it's also written on the graph. So it's pretty simple. So if we travel from this point, which is the max, so we're looking at the y coordinate here. This is the max. And this right here, the y coordinate, this is the minimum. Okay, remember the amplitude is going to be half the distance between these two. Okay, so we're just going to do 1/2. And we're just going to subtract these two numbers, 6.75 minus 1.25. And you take the absolute value if need be. So that's 1/2. And this is going to be 5.5. Okay, and half of 5.5 is just 2.75. And that's it. Again, distance or amplitude is always positive. So this distance right here would just be 2.75. That is our amplitude. Remember the definition in the beginning. The amplitude is half the distance from one extreme to the other. So the maximum to the minimum, you just find that distance and take half. All right, 2.75 right in the box. All right, below is the graph. They give us the midline coordinate and the maximum point coordinate. Okay, so pretty much the same as problem number 1. We're looking at the y coordinate. Okay, so this right here is the max. Again, we're looking at the y coordinate for the midline. This right here is the midline.
Good evening again to everybody. We're about 5 minutes.
Okay, again, we're looking at the y coordinate, and the amplitude is just the distance from the max or minimum to the midline. Okay, so we just have to find this distance here for the amplitude. All right, so we're just going to take the subtract and take the absolute value. So we have 675, and we have 275. And of course, that is just 4. Okay, and just a tip real quick. If you subtract numbers and you put the larger value first, obviously you will always get a positive answer. So if you want to put the larger value first when you subtract, you won't even need the absolute value. All right, so here they give us the coordinate for the maximum point and the minimum point. All right, let's take a look. Okay, and as you can see, the coordinate is written right on the graph. So right here is our max. We're looking at the y coordinate for the max. And right here is our minimum. Okay, again, we're looking at the y coordinate. So the amplitude is half of this distance. Okay, so in other words, we want half of 7.7 minus negative 6.7. Okay, so we have 1/2. The 2 negatives in a row make it positive, and this is going to be 13 or 14.4. Okay, so notice the 2 negatives made it positive, and half of 14 is 7. Half of 0.4 is 0.2, and that's it. 7.2 is that distance, basically. I drew it a little crooked. Halfway there is the amplitude. All right, 7.2.